Hello, and welcome to your weekly briefing for Global Conflict 1. In this video, I'll be covering days 74 to 80, and as usual, attempting to best document the various political changes that have occurred within this world within that time frame. As I'm sure many of you are aware, this past week has been a holiday week for many people, especially in Western countries with the celebration of Christmas. So, as might be expected, when more players are spending their time away from the game with family and whatnot, we have experienced fewer changes within the past week than in previous weeks, which is part of the reason that this video is being recorded one day later than usual. I held out for a bit longer in the hopes that it would give players who spent the holiday away from the game a little bit extra time to reply, because as you might be aware, Friday was the 25th of December, so that's the day that everybody is celebrating Christmas for the most part, and it also happens to be the day, Friday, that I usually record the weekly briefing on. So I thought I would give players a little bit extra time to respond to my requests for information, and in doing so, what I discovered was that, not a whole lot has happened because it was a holiday week. So I will pretty much be focusing on some small things that did happen. If you notice over here in Canada, this county, the county of Alaska, I should say, has been flipped to House 19. So as you can see, there is a major push by House 19 into House 2 territory, especially into northwestern Canada. I pointed out last week that the island of Vancouver was being contested, and we saw a few extra House 19 players in southwest Canada. Well, within the span of 7 days, House 19 has succeeded in flipping the county of Alaska over to them. As you can see, they own 10 parishes just in that county, and that does take a little bit of effort, I would have to say. So there is definitely an offensive being launched by House 19 against House 2 in Canada, and although on the main map it still shows that county is being controlled by House 15, that this is one of those small subtleties that is just not picked up by the county and province history buttons. I mean, those buttons are great, don't get me wrong. They really do document a lot of stuff that before was just swept under the rug, but there's some small changes like this that, while they are significant from a more grounded viewpoint, are just not picked up by the game itself. And also over here, Ireland has been flipped to House 19 as well. It should be noted, though, that as with previous weeks, pretty much the entirety of December, we had players jumping on and off vacation mode to use those last vacation modes up before they reset at the start of the new year. And that is what's still going on. A lot of the players, they try to balance it out so that not everybody happens to be on vacation mode in the month, in 2 weeks or so of December. And players pretty much have up until December 31st to actually activate the vacation mode. And remember, that is December 31st UTC, which is the time the game goes by, so it's not going to be localized for your time. So if you're going to want to attempt to sort of squeeze that last vacation mode in there just before the vacation mode is reset, make sure to remember that it is based off of the UTC time, the game, not your local time. Another thing I would like to make note of is that while last week's video sort of pointed out that House 1 had been all but removed from the Middle East, you can see they've made somewhat of a resurgence here as more of their players have come out of vacation mode and have succeeded in securing themselves a couple of provinces here. One of the very interesting things I discovered this week about House 1 is that they actually have sort of two separately operating factions or groups within that house that really operate independently of each other. The first is Dave 1's group of players who, they are very independent, let's say. They don't communicate nearly as much as the other group, which happens to be comprised of a good few Russian players, and they are much more collective in their strategies, let's say. So, House 1, I have mentioned this in the past, but their ideal alliance is with House 19, so it's not unsurprising that we would see more Russian players from House 19 maybe in House 1 now, especially given the fact that House 1 was doing very poorly. A lot of their players had been pretty much reset, so they were a very weak house, and despite the fact that they didn't have any alliances, House 19 is the obvious alliance to go for given who they're fighting. So I thought that was really interesting that, despite the fact they're pretty much on the same page, you have two groups within the same house, really not, the figurative left hand doesn't know what the right is doing, so to speak, which is really a common problem in situations where language can be a barrier, which it largely is when you're dealing with players who predominantly speak English and another group of players that predominantly speak Russian. The interesting point I wanted to make about House 12 is, despite the fact that they're pretty much surrounded on all sides, they have held out quite valiantly. They have definitely lost some land, and they're probably under some pretty intense pressure now. But overall, I'm surprised they haven't crumbled altogether. There was one thing about their alliance that really surprised me. They had House 12 has an alliance with House 2, but given the fact that a lot of House 12 was located over here in China, they're pretty much the world away from the rest of their allies, so of course it's always difficult to support allies that are that far removed from the home base, so to speak. They have held out, but they are losing some land, and I think that pretty much sums it up for this week. If you are interested in learning about the alliances, or if this is the first time you've watched any of these videos and you aren't aware of the current alliances, take a look at last week's video. I cover all the alliance information in that video, and nothing has really changed of note in this past week regarding alliances, so I won't take any more time away from your holidays. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week.
Stronghold Kingdoms. What will you fight for? Play now for free.